All right, everybody. Hey, Todd. How are you? Good to see you. All right, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks, y'all. And Merry Christmas to everybody. I'm wearing my festive Christmas sweater. So Merry Christmas to everybody. I appreciate everybody coming out on this final meeting of the study committee for the juvenile court judges. Hopefully, I think we'll have a brief meeting today. And then we're going to have a brief powwow with some of the committee members on some of our recommendations that we're going to have as a result of this committee. But first up, we're going to hear from Greg Price, who is the elected juvenile court judge in Floyd County. Judge Price? You are not. There's three other people that are going to be testifying today, but I appreciate your being here.
No problem. I'm happy to be here. I don't know if you want a presentation or if you want to ask me questions or...
Why don't you just kind of walk us through a little bit about the history of how your position, it being unique in the state of Georgia as being the only elected juvenile court judge in the state of Georgia, how that kind of came about, and what your thoughts are on that process and the effect it may or may not have on your responsibilities and duties. And
Okay, that's not a problem. And the reason that I know about the history of this, since I'm the second elected judge in the state, Judge Tim Pape was the first elected juvenile court judge. In 1980 in Floyd County, as in any county, there was politics. There was a juvenile court judge that some of the Superior Court judges loved, some of them didn't. We got a brand new Superior Court judge in 1980, and that was Judge Bob Walther, who's now retired. And there was a dislike as to the existing juvenile judge, so there was communication to our legislative group, and they went before the legislature and got a resolution to establish a local constitutional amendment with a ballot. And in 81 it was passed. In 82 it became an elected position. It was a part-time position. And Judge Pape was in the practice of law, and he part-time for $14,000 a year, believe it or not, as the part-time juvenile court judge. In 1987, it was moved to a full-time position, again through local constitutional amendment. And then in 1994, it was full-time with an accelerated salary. And since that time, it has been an elected position. There has been only one contested election. Judge Pape had a probation officer who had a relationship with a local attorney's husband, and the spouse wanted the probation officer fired, and Judge Pape refused to do so. And so she ran against Judge Pape, and Judge Pape won. So there's only been one contested election as to a juvenile court judge in the state. All the rest of them have been appointed. The process is that, and the reason I know this is because when Judge Pape decided to retire, he said, I was his associate judge, and he obviously wished that I would take the position. And he said, who appoints you? Does the governor appoint you, or do the Superior Court judges appoint you? So he tasked me to go back and pull all of the legislation. And the bottom line is that the Superior Court judges have the ability to appoint someone to replace someone who retires in the middle of a term. Then after that, it's elected by public election. And that's the history of it. So realistically, there has really only been one election for a juvenile court judge in the state. I've been asked by members of the Council of Juvenile Court Judges when we've been to a retreat in Macon about what it's like being the only elected juvenile court judge. What are the pros and cons? And I hope I do not offend anybody here that is a Superior Court judge. But with having been a pro tem judge since 1988, an associate judge since 2008, and the full-time chief judge since 2012, I have observed throughout the state, and being delicate here, the power of self-control or self-destiny of being an elected judge. I There's always politics, whether you're appointed or whether you're elected. But in my opinion, you can control your destiny by being an elected official. And it's just like Judge Pape that sometimes bemoaned the fact that he had to run to keep his job. You know, my opinion is that if I don't satisfy the needs of my community and the public, then you need to vote me out. Judge Pape had a feeling that he did not want our data to be exchanged so that people would know what's going on in the court. I'm absolute opposite from that. My data is my destiny. If I do good and my numbers are showing that I'm doing good, then people will vote for me. Now, there are downfalls. I have to come out of pocket 3.5% every time I go for an election. I've personally chosen not to solicit for contributions for campaign funding. That's a personal decision I make. And that comes out of, obviously, my pocket. And that's an expense that an elected person would have to do. And you do have to campaign. You do have to get out in the public, whereas if you're appointed by the Superior Court judges, it's not necessary that you get out in the public as far as retaining your position. But as all of the juvenile court judges in here well know, we have transmogrified from putting on the black robe, grabbing the gavel and sitting on the bench, getting off, take the black robe off and finish our job. We are a service court. We are in the public. If you were to talk to each of the judges that are here and talk to them how much time off the bench that they've spent working for juvenile causes, working for state committees, just as an example, when I took full time, I started a ledger, and I have it to today. I have developed 335 days of comp days based on the number of extra hours that I've worked in the community. And that's part of the job. And that helps me, obviously, as an elected judge, to be seen in the community doing my job. But back to the point. There are political circumstances, like I said, on both sides of the coin, whether you're elected or appointed. My concern is this. I have seen some extremely good juvenile court judges who have ticked off the Superior Court judges for either personal reasons or political reasons, and they've lost their reappointment. I've seen juvenile court judges who have had to accept responsibilities as a Superior Court function, sitting as a Superior Court judge, when their caseloads are stacking up and they have to do divorce cases. And people are grinning. There are some of the judges that are in here that have gone through that process. And I've seen judges who have been removed from office, not because of the skills and the quality of their being capable judges and extraordinary judges, but because some Superior Court judges didn't like political circumstance. That, to me, is my advantage. There's a code section, 151115, that says that whenever a Superior Court judge has a case and the juvenile court has a matter involved with it involving those same children, that there can be a transfer to the juvenile court to handle, either to report back after an investigation or to actually handle the disposition as to a custody determination. And it does have a provision in the code section that says that the judge can refuse to do so. I do. Sometimes. I don't mind taking those cases because it affects my case. But there are other courts that have no choice. They cannot say, I will not take that because they get retribution from the Superior Court judges. Now, I'm being very totally honest here, and I've said this to everybody, even my Superior Court judges. So my opinion, and this is my personal opinion, if y'all make any recommendations, the recommendations need to take away the control from the Superior Court. Because I personally think that I've seen abuses. Now, I'm not saying all of the courts have done that. All the Superior Courts do that, but there are some examples. As to the issue of being elected, there are some political issues there as well, even though it's a nonpartisan election, as we've seen in the recent Court of Appeals election when one of the candidates was sanctioned for talking about being a Republican in their documentation that they've publicized. there's politics, no matter even in nonpartisan elections. You know, when I was told that I was going to be asked to make a presentation here today, first thing I thought about is, yeah, I know I'm unique in the state of Georgia, but am I unique in the United States? How are juvenile court judges appointed? So I did a little research, and it's a plethora. Some are appointed for life. Some of them are appointed by the governor. Some of them are appointed by committees, and some of them are appointed by Superior Court judges. One of the things that I discovered, and I would ask this committee to look at, is retention elections. State of Missouri, state of Utah, they have a system whereby whenever a vacancy comes up, there's a committee that makes kind of like to the governor for the appellate court positions and the Superior Court positions, that a committee does a vetting of these individuals that were wanting to be on the bench. They make recommendations after investigation to the appointing authority, whether it be the governor or a committee or a Superior Court judge or whoever. And then once that person is elected, a committee validates every time the term comes up and does a recommendation back as to whether or not this person is fulfilling their responsibilities appropriately under the law. And that person goes up for a retention election to the public, who gets those reports that are published in the newspaper, and the community decides whether or not to retain that judge. I like that situation. I would not mind being operative under that situation myself. That's pretty much how I see the circumstances as between elected and appointed. If you ask the rest of the juvenile court judges in the state, no matter what the circumstance, they still like being appointed. I still can't understand that. Of course, I'm in a skewed position. You know, I've never been in a situation where I've had to worry about being reappointed by the Superior Court judges. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have relative to the election versus the appointed prospect that I have.
I appreciate that. Do members of the committee have any questions? I have several. But do members of the committee, if you do, just hit the button by your mic.
Good morning, Judge Price.
Good morning.
We appreciate your coming, taking time out to present to us.
Well, since you told me I had to be here, I'm glad to be here. There you go.
I wanted to ask you, yours is a 4-year term.
It is.
On these transfers, these are done without a designation order, is that right? The ones you were talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. And the Missouri plan, does the governor make that appointment initially, or does the committee make that appointment initially?
You know, quite candidly, I did not delve into it that deeply, but I can give you some websites that you can go to that will give you a listing of all of the methodologies of appointment of judges on each level: magistrate, county, Superior Court, Supreme Court, District Court. The American Judicature Society, you can go to www.judicialselection.us, and they have a very extensive presentation of how the different states utilize. I'm looking here at Alaska. Judicial Council established a performance for judges standing retention and evaluation forms that they do. So that's fairly thorough. Also, if you go to the National Conference of State Courts, NCSC, they also have a segment that basically breaks it down as well, that should give you some indicia as to how the other states are utilizing appointment and or elections and or retention committees and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you so much. Any further questions? Okay. I was wondering, you touched on it briefly, kind of your interaction with the Superior Courts. So how exactly do you have any interaction with them? Do they ever sit for you? Do you ever sit for them? Do you have an order of mutual assistance? How does that work?
Well, in a one-county circuit, which we are in Floyd County, we have a population of 98,000, have had that for the last 30 years. We raise our kids and we send them to Atlanta. That's sad to me, but that's what happens. That's where the money is. We have a good relationship. Our judges, our Superior Court judges, we've practiced together for forever. So we get along really well. Some of the larger counties, I don't know. I mean, you might want to talk to some of the judges in the larger county about that. Generally what happens is and they don't abuse it. I'm very, if I had to go to the point where I gave up my election or it was taken away from me and I was controlled by the Superior Court judges in my county, I would not be so upset. But we have a communication, and they're very good. Judge Anidrak and Judge Colston, who's unfortunately retiring, they usually will call me. We're in the same building. They'll just buzz down on the intercom and say, I've got this case. They say that you've got this case for a dependency. Would you be willing to take the custody determination since you know more about this than I do? 99 times out of 100, I'll say, fine, that's not a problem, send it down, even though we were massively overloaded on our caseloads based on the modification of the statute, the new juvenile code, which increases our reviews, which eats up our calendar. But be that as it is, I don't have any complications with that. Sometimes I have complications when the judges really don't understand how they're supposed to transfer that to me to give me the proper authority. So I fixed that, and I just fixed them a form up and said, fill it out, put the names and sign here and send it.
Thank you. And one of the things that we heard about last time was the resources that are available for our juvenile courts and kind of the burden on, the local jurisdictions as far as the county government, the city government, kind of where those resources should come from, whether they should be state resources. How is your court funded? And what does your staff look like and that sort of thing?
My court is obviously, as y'all probably well know, the way that the juvenile courts are funded is through a legislative grant, which thank goodness we got a small increase in the grant with HB 5 2 years ago. The funding for all of the resources that are provided to our court are from our county commissions. Obviously not being a state judicial officer, but being a local county officer, we have to go to our commissioners and submit our budgets every year for approval. I'd say most of the time in my circuit, our commissioners are very receptive to providing what the court needs. As far as resources that we don't have, these are resources that are resources not so much for the staffing of the court, but resources for the services that need to be provided for our clients within the court, the parents and the children. We've been very strong and been able to get in our community, thanks to some programs that we've developed through Casey Family Programs with the Community of Hope and the State of Hope program, which our division director has absorbed into the DFAC system. We've been able to get a lot of faith-based and community corporations that have helped develop programs to provide those sources which are not available through funding or through county. My staff consists of, I'm an independent court, and I think most of y'all know the difference between an independent and a dependent court in juvenile court, which is somewhat of a bifurcation. And that's why we're trying to develop the JADEX program, and we'll talk about that later at the next JADEX meeting. But the resources that we have for my court are, I have 6 probation officers who also dual function as after-hours intake officers. I have 3 clerks of court, and if you know of anybody that wants a job as a clerk of court, I need one because we're losing our best clerk of court. I have a court administrator. I have 2 specifically assigned public defenders, and I have 1 specifically assigned assistant district attorney to handle prosecutions of delinquencies and chins. I have 2 dedicated deputies from the sheriff's office that are on staff, 1 who is in the courtroom at all times and 1 who's on the road serving papers. And I have a panel coordinator who handles judicial citizens panel reviews, trainings, and facilitation as to our judicial panel. I have 2 staff guardian ad litem attorneys that are funded through the county, and I have 1 licensed professional counselor on staff that is funded by contracting through county funds. Does that answer the question? Okay.
Yes, it does. Thank you. I appreciate that. Because that's just one of the issues that we, constantly address whenever we're, trying to develop policies. And Deborah Nesbitt from ACCG spoke quite a bit about, the burden on the counties and the local jurisdictions for some of those resources, some of those mandates that the state has enacted. So I appreciate that. Anybody have any questions?
Bryce, you have grants that you use for some of your programs?
We do not. If you'll remember when the incentive grants came out, when there was an intent to reduce the cost to the Department of Juvenile Justice and the state as to bed space cost for detention, we did the DAI development. I was on the DAI committee that did that. We determined that based on the number of commitments that we made and the number of detention of youth that we don't do, we would never qualify. And based on the fact that that grant was a reimbursement grant, our county was not willing to absorb the cost and then seek reimbursement, especially since the percentage reduction we would never meet because we never had that big of an issue. So we've never been in a position to be able to qualify those. And I know they've removed those qualifications, but we just, number one, we don't have the facility for that. Our courthouse is more than packed. We're actually doing a space needs study right now to take my courtroom, which would take up about 1/5 of this room, which is kind of tiny. They're trying to find us a place. But we do not have any state incentive grants, although we probably could qualify if we had the space to put it there.
Do any of your Superior Court judges have a drug court?
That's a political circumstance as well. We have a Superior Court judge who had adamantly opposed drug courts, along with our district attorney who adamantly opposed drug courts. He is not yet, after his retirement, been appointed by the governor to be a senior judge. Judge Colston, who is retiring, was adamant for a drug court. When she got to be the senior judge, she got a drug court. It's working quite well.
Have you considered a family treatment court?
I have considered a family treatment court, and I've talked to our commissioners about funding some additional personnel and space for that. They've not given me the authorization to proceed with that, but they anticipate once they relocate the juvenile court, or what they call the inferior courts, out of our main courthouse to some other building, there's a likelihood that they will authorize us to go forward with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Judge?
Judge Price, do you have an associate judge?
I do have an associate judge who has been a longtime associate judge. He was the associate judge with Judge Pape, Judge Duffy. He handles, and that's how I'm here today, he handles on Fridays our chins cases and our delinquency cases for me.
Does the Superior Court try to have any input on who that would be, or do they pretty much leave you alone about selection of that?
The Superior Court judge, and I guess I owe this to the historical relationship of Judge Pape with our Superior Court judges. Many of you who have known Judge Pape know that he's a very outspoken person, and you're grinning. He has always been somewhat confrontational, even with me. And he was able to control the Superior Court judges from, those were his words. He was able to make the determination as to who is going to be the associate judge. I know that recently retired juvenile court judge down in Paulding County had some difficulty as to the ability to select who the associate judge was going to be, but I've never had any complications.
As far as your budget, does the Superior Court have any influence on that, or do they go to the commissioners for you, or help you with that?
No, I am totally independent. I have the advantage of having 3 of the 5 commissioners as my immediate neighbors in my neighborhood, so that helps. And they're really good people, and it's not just because they know me as a neighbor, but they know how important juvenile court is. And they know how important it is to our community that our children, and I'm sounding like I'm running for election, doesn't it?
It's a habit we all elected officials kind of fall into. I'm sorry. It's all good.
They realize that our kids are our community's future, and if we don't provide for them, there will be no more good juvenile court judges or county commissioners. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from the committee? All right, Judge, I appreciate you coming, and I appreciate your input. As the only elected judge and a juvenile court judge in the state, you're the only one that can speak to those issues. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm just not used to having to look this way and that way. Why don't you guys?
It happens every time, and there's usually somebody who sits on the very far end, and sometimes that's me. And we actually have a couple of committee members that are sneaking in the back. Darshan talking about you. So anyway, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hopefully it's all good. As an elected official, you're never really sure. Next, we'll hear from Lisa Jones for Americas. Darshan.
Good morning.
Thank you. If you'll just introduce yourself to the committee, and also we have several members that, they're either having family from out of town and stuff, so we have quite an audience online. So
Sure.
if you could just kind of introduce yourself really briefly to the committee, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you all for having me. My name is Lisa Jones, and I'm the juvenile court judge for the Southwestern Judicial Circuit down in Americus. That's our biggest town, and that's where I actually live and where we're based from. Our 6 counties are Lee, Macon, Sly, Stewart, Sumter, and Webster. It's a very large geographical area. It extends from about, just south of Fort Valley down to Albany and over to Columbus. So we're a lot different than, say, Judge Price's circuit. And I'm glad to be here because I think that every circuit that we have is different. I know Judge Spivey, he loves to tell everyone that I only have 6 counties, he has 8. But, our court is very different. I was appointed back in 2001 after funding was made available for each circuit for a juvenile court judge. At that time, we did not have a juvenile court judge at all. And I was an assistant district attorney, and I handled juvenile court and most of the crimes against women and children. There were, a great number of applications for the position, and, I was very pleased to have gotten it because I had not had, as many years as experience as some of the other applicants. But I think our superior court judges looked at it with great concern. They wanted someone who was, very motivated and connected to the community that could get in there and, make where we live a better place. And some of the applicants looked at it as kind of a retirement position. When I got the position, I had no resources. I didn't even have a chair. That was the big joke in the circuit. So I called Pete Colbinson, if you all remember him, and he helped me get a grant, and we started from there. When I received the position, we were not having parents or children represented in most cases. For the delinquents that were not being advised of their rights, there were just a host of problems that we had. Our supervision fees were controlled by the Department of Juvenile Justice. We had no clerk. An employee of the Department of Juvenile Justice served as the clerk. And she said, as soon as we have a juvenile court judge appointed, I don't want to do this anymore. So we were clerkless. The Superior Court clerks did not want to take on that position. With 6 counties, it was very difficult to get funding for a clerk. But I did, and we keep all our records in Americus, which works very well. And the problem that we have is that I don't have a court administrator, and I have 6 counties with 6 different budgets. So every time I want to do something, I have to go through 6 different budget cycles, and they all have different cycles. Some start in March, some start in the summer, some start as late as November. So it is very hard to get funding for anything. And I'll tell you, just as Judge Price said, I was very happy to get the increase appropriated to us in the last year or so because, in almost 18 years, the counties have given me about $5,900 in addition to, what I'm provided under the grant as salary. And that's it. And that was about 10 or 12 years ago. I got excited a couple of years ago because Sumter County, which is our host county, partnered with UGA, the Carl Vinson Institute, to do a big salary survey and study. So I did my homework, got a salary survey from the council, presented everything. The person I was interviewed by was very, had a lot of questions and felt like he was very well informed after that about the nature of my position. And then it was announced this past spring that they just decided to give all full-time county employees a 50-cent raise an hour. So I thought, well, at least that's something. And then I never got it, so now I'm saying, where is my 50-cent raise, like everybody else? But then they've decided, maybe that doesn't apply to elected or appointed officials. Meanwhile, I'm the only appointed official. So they're still trying to decide if I get the 50-cent raise or not, and this has been going on all year. So anyway, that's just an example of the budgetary issues that I have. And I've got some great, partnerships down there. When I started, we were starting from scratch, and was able to develop the CASA program, which led to Southwest Georgia Children's Alliance. It's called Sawega Children's Alliance, and that is our umbrella organization that started with that $15,000 CASA grant. But now through private funding and grants, we have $1 million budget, and we have 12 full-time employees. And what that program is an umbrella for is our Child Advocacy Center, which provides forensic interviews, therapy, counseling, assessments, family assessments, substance abuse assessment, domestic violence assessments, and then implements those services for children from those assessments. They also house our CASA program, and our CASA program has branched out into other circuits as well. We started it there in the Southwestern Circuit, but it's spread over to the west and over to the east and down south a little bit, so that's been a great thing. Our Children's Alliance also handles our CHINS program. We've had a CHINS coordinator pretty much since the whole CHINS legislation came about, and it also handles our truancy prevention program, which we've always had, and our MDT meetings, the multidisciplinary team meetings. So while I think that our children are better cared for than ever, the court itself is struggling because we're overwhelmed. As you all know, our dependency cases are at an all-time high, our DFACS cases. I'm the only judge in our circuit, and I am usually in Americus on Mondays and Wednesdays, and then I travel to the other counties Tuesdays and Thursdays, or I fill in for Superior Court a couple days a month doing child support. And I think the reason they've always asked me to do that is because I serve on the Child Support Commission, and they just feel like I kind of am in the know on that stuff. So, I've always had a really good relationship with our Superior Court judges. I'm in my 5th term. I don't think that they would have continued to appoint me if they, weren't happy with my services, nor do I think I would have continued to want to be there if I was not happy. This is not a job you do for anything other than just personal reward. We all, in here are just trying to make, things better for our children's futures. I don't have anyone to fill in for me. They cover for me when I need them to, and I've covered for them over the years. But, our relationships have always been good, so that's a great thing. But as far as handling any budget issues or administrative issues, I've always done that myself. And now I only have 2 employees. One is our clerk, and she's overwhelmed. In fact, she told me yesterday she's looking at a job in Macomb, and I really hope that doesn't happen. And then I have a deputy clerk that also serves as our panel coordinator, and we have citizens review panels in all our counties. I think that we need to plan for the future. Just last week I was at the Justice for Children, committee meeting, and Mary Margaret Oliver brought up the discussion of extending our jurisdiction to, age 18 for our juveniles. And, that's going to be more of a stressor on the system. And, down where, we are, I know in South Georgia that there are other judges like me that have not been provided extra funding by the counties for their salaries and things like that. And I really think that one of the great things about our position is that we are part of the state retirement system, the judiciary retirement system. And I think that's kept a lot of people on board when they weren't, receiving any, additional, monies from their counties, that's been a really good thing. And I can't speak for everyone, but I feel like that's kind of the input on it. So I hope that kind of sums up what we have going on down there.
I appreciate that. Is there anything that from the state level, kind of absent, kind of coming in, and is there anything we could do to facilitate, because it's something that regardless of what kind of court, if you're a multi-county, Superior Court, if you're a multi-county, because I know I worked for a prosecuting attorney in a multi-county circuit once, and one county hated the other county, and so we kind of got hosed whenever it came to a lot of different things. There was kind of one county that was kind of the redheaded stepchild, and we had to buy our own coffee, and it was just really petty. Sugar was really a hot commodity in the DA's office, so I remember those days. But I don't, it just kind of runs rampant. It's kind of everywhere. Can you think of any policies or anything like that we could do as a state to try to facilitate, some of those counties kind of coming together and kind of harmonizing a little bit better?
We haven't really had so much of a problem with that, and I think the reason we have not is, Sumter is our county with the largest population, and it actually has more cases than all the other counties combined, and that's where, we are housed from. But our circuit-wide budget is based on a pro rata share from each county according to their population. That was the most fair way that we knew how to do it, and no one's ever complained about it. It varies from year to year. Some years, one of the counties will have, less people but more cases, but all in all, that's the best way that we knew how to handle it. So.
Okay. Judge, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Judge Jones. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I know you had to come a long way. I share in most of your concerns because other than the fact that their Superior Court clerks don't do the clerk, we pretty much have the same problems. What I want to know is why can't the Superior Court judges assign the juvenile court budget issues to their court administrator?
I would have loved that. They just haven't taken that initiative.
Because our judges do that in the Okmulgee circuit, and I think they do it in the Middle Circuit, don't they, Tom?
Yes, sir. I never had to deal with it because my district court administrator, the law says is administratively attached to the Superior Court, and so the district court administrator undertook that responsibility automatically.
That would.
I never had to go to a budget.
Do you have to go around to all the county commission meetings to present the budget?
I always have.
Wow.
That's why I'm saying, every circuit is different. Like as far as elections or appointments are concerned, what we do is so sensitive. If I had to run, I can't imagine saying, I'm running because guess what? I locked up this many kids this year. You should be, wanting me, or I took this many children from their parents. And where we live is so small. For instance, I was in the post office on Tuesday in Americus, and the lady in there that always helps me, she said, "Hey, Judge, come on down here." And she helped me, and then she said, "You're going to have my daughter in court tomorrow." And I thought, oh no, this woman's been helping me for years, at the post office. So sure enough, I said, "Well, what is her name?" And I remembered it. And so the next day, she was there, and she was serving as a relative resource, and it was fine. But, just like, where Judge Spivey lives, you go into the grocery store or to Walmart or wherever you go, and people are always like, hey, Judge. And I tell people that, and they say, well, aren't you concerned for your safety? And I say, well, I really don't prowl around much at night. And you know, if you treat people the way you would like to be treated, you're pretty much okay, you know.
I mean, I think unfortunately, you know, I get the same thing. It's chairman, it's representative, it's, you know, I think anytime you're kind of in a public position, whether it be elected or appointed, I think there's always kind of that notoriety. It takes me sometimes 2 or 3 hours to get through Publix, so everybody wants to talk about something. So I certainly sympathize with that. I did want to ask. Yeah, Tom, you mentioned the district court administrator. So are you talking about like the judicial district court administrator, or are you talking about the superior court administrator? Sorry.
Ms. Family, so unless things have changed, at the time it was Nolan Martin, and he was the
He was ours.
10th, what was the 10th district? Or the 8th district?
Eighth, yeah.
Yeah. And so he handled all the Superior Court's administrative business for the
Mhm.
entire 8th district, which included our circuit and several other, I guess yours as well. And so all of the budget issues, all of the making sure that all the Superior Courts and juvenile courts were handled properly. I literally never had to go to a county commission meeting to deal with that.
Mhm.
And I think, I'm glad I had somebody covering for me, so.
Yeah. So do the judicial administrators, I mean, as somebody who sits on public safety appropriations and deals with a lot of the courts in the state of Georgia, does the administrative office of the courts and the judicial and the administrative districts throughout the state, do they not do that anymore?
I'll just give you an example of, you know, every November, I do my calendar for the next year,
Mm-hmm.
right after the Superior Courts do their calendar, and their administrator does it. Well, I have to wait until after they're finished to make sure that I have a courtroom, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the court administrator used to help me with that a long time ago. But then they decided, or she decided, that she was the Superior Court administrator. And so, you know, after that, I never got any assistance with that anymore.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think every circuit's different.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Judge, do you have
Well, I was just gonna say, I don't know whether the legislature could mandate the court administrators to do that or not. I don't know whether it would be a violation of the separation of powers clause, but it would help, certainly in your situation. I couldn't do 8 counties without the court administrator handling our budget. I just couldn't do it. I mean, I'd have to quit. I wanted to ask you, how many Superior Court judges do you have in your circuit?
3,
So you didn't get the extra 25%.
right.
I don't know how you live on that.
Oh, I have two teenagers, one in college, you know, at Georgia. It's not easy. It's not. But, you know, my issue, as far as my courtroom time, I can handle that. It's my dependency orders and that type thing. If I had a law clerk and a secretary, that would help me tremendously. I spend more time on orders. I can't imagine having a good law clerk, how wonderful that would be. You know, right now, as far as having any kind of assistance, my clerk has to help. And, you know, we call her our clerk, you know, administrative assistant. And she's overwhelmed. You know, no wonder she wants to go to Macon. So I need some personnel.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Any other questions for Judge Jones? Okay.
Sure.
Hit your button if you'll hit the. We have to do that because we're broadcasting, so I do apologize. But if you'll hit the button, I can turn your mic on. You did? Okay. Is it on? Which one are you? Nope. You are.
Oh, it
right.
just came up.
Oh, there we go.
I just had to turn it.
Okay.
You don't have an associate judge, I gather?
I don't.
And you mentioned about all the time you spend doing order. I'm a SAG in Fulton County, so it kind of perked my attention. But you don't do your own, doesn't your SAG do your
I
orders?
don't do my own orders.
Okay,
But my orders are not good.
okay.
And, you know, with 78% of terminations being reversed, I am not comfortable with the orders that I get. So I spend a great deal of time tweaking those orders.
I can imagine.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Judge Jones. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Thank
Thank
you. Next up is Maureen Wood. Judge Wood?
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Judge Wood. I appreciate your joining us. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. So, my name is Maureen Wood. I am the Rockdale County Juvenile Court Judge. I was appointed in 2016. So I am relatively new. I don't think I have any advice as it relates to being elected or appointed. But what I can say, and I think maybe the reason Judge Scales asked me to come and speak is because I had a conversation with her about how things look so different depending on where you are in the state, depending on how many Superior Court judges you have as it relates to the process of being appointed. Rockdale County has 2 Superior Court judges, and traditionally the Chief Judge has made the appointment. The judge who held my position before me did not seek reappointment. So I was appointed in that scenario. Judge David Irwin is the chief judge. Judge Robert Mumford is the other Superior Court judge. Judge Mumford spent time as a SAG. And I think both of them are very familiar with juvenile court and how the work that we do as judges is very specialized. However, I do recall a time when Judge Mumford was running for his position and several other people were running in that election. Certainly, if you only have 2 Superior Court judges and the person who wins is not so familiar with how specialized the position of juvenile court judge is, there may be a concern if that were the person who were making the decision as to who to appoint or whether to reappoint someone or not. The other challenge I think we have in Rockdale County is that we're growing tremendously. I think I was just looking on my phone. I think there was the census, I think the population growth in 2010, population was around 85,000. The latest census shows us around 90,000, but I've heard that we think it's closer to 98,000 right now. And Rockdale County is going to continue to grow. We just got approved. I think we're going to have another state court judge, but I am the only juvenile court judge in the county, and I have added several programs since I've been there just to address our needs and our growing needs. And so I think it's also important to take into consideration, just like the other judges have spoken about, all the things that we do outside of the courtroom. Rockdale County tried to, well, there was a ballot, there was a bond referendum. We were seeking a courthouse, a new courthouse. I think the current courthouse, the last time it was renovated, there were 20,000 residents. That was in the 70s. And so now we have the population of upwards of 90,000 and nothing new in terms of space of the courthouse. So we certainly are bursting out of the seams. And we're going to be adding a state court judge, and I share my courtroom with probate court. So one of the reasons that I'm able to be here today is because probate court has the courtroom today and tomorrow, well, yesterday and today. So we alternate Thursdays and Fridays every other week with probate court.
I appreciate that. Does any of the committee members, can you speak just a little bit about, since you're so recently appointed, can you speak just a little bit about your appointment process? What was the committee, who were the committee members that you, what was that process like? Because it's very amorphous. It's very kind of undefined right now in statute. So what did that process, who were the committee that the Superior Court judges appointed? What did that look like?
And I think that's probably why Judge Scales thought I should probably speak today. I was a private attorney. I did a lot of work in juvenile court representing parents and children for about a decade. Mainly, I did a lot of work in Newton County. They actually had attorneys that had contracts representing parents and children, so I did a lot of work there, but also did some work in Rockdale County as well, juvenile court. It made up a pretty large percentage of my time in my practice doing juvenile court work. But when you have a small county and you have one or two Superior Court judges, in my county, the chief judge makes that decision. So I had spent several years in and out of the courtroom representing clients, family law matters, before Judge Irwin and Judge Nation, and prior to Judge Mumford, Judge Mumford. So I was very familiar with them. And so I indicated when I knew that it was time for the appointment that I was interested, and the advertisement ran in the paper, and I did what most people would do for an interview. And so I sat down for an interview and I applied, and there were several other people that applied.
Who did you interview with? Was there a committee that was appointed?
There's no committee.
Okay.
It's the chief judge. So
Okay.
it was Judge David Irwin.
Mhm.
And so several people applied for the position.
Okay. So there was no input from, say, DFACS or prosecutors or anybody like that, Department of Juvenile Justice, or none of the interested parties that generally
if there
interact
was,
with.
I'm not aware of that. I'm
Okay.
sure that Judge Irwin, because he has relationships, Rockdale County is very similar to some of the other people that testified in terms of everyone knowing everyone still for the most part. So I'm sure that he got input, but there was no
Okay.
formal committee.
Yeah. Okay. So, some have testified that there's, the Superior Courts will, kind of appoint their own kind of, juvenile judge, JNC, kind of a judicial nominating committee, where they'll kind of go through all of and then there'll be kind of a short list that gets turned over to the Superior Court. So,
That did not happen in
Okay.
Rockdale.
okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Judge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Judge Wood, good to have you with us today.
Thank
you
you.
for being here. Do you have an associate judge?
I do not,
So you're the sole judge in the juvenile court?
yes.
All right. Thank you. Judge Wood, I appreciate your being here.
Thank you so much.
So much. All right. We are, Todd Ashley with the Prosecuting Attorneys Council is going to speak briefly to us about the interaction of prosecutors and juvenile courts and kind of their role in juvenile court. So, Mr. Ashley, if you would. You can either speak from the podium or you can speak at the table. It's your, okay.
Well,
There you go. Oh. Okay.
thank you, Madam Chairman, and members of the committee for the opportunity to be here today. And we appreciate the opportunity to be heard on this issue. The Prosecuting Attorneys Council is proud of our working relationship with a lot of our friends seated behind me. Just about any time I go somewhere, I see Eric John somewhere, or I'll see, Joe Vignotti or somebody, one of our other stakeholder partners. And the Prosecuting Attorneys Council, as the voice of Georgia's prosecutors, is happy to cooperate and work together on issues of mutual concern. Relative to this process, I don't know that there is a policy position for us to have, but I will say this. If the committee is inclined to proceed with a committee-type appointment structure, or a board or a commission that interviews, the JNC type system, we would ask that the local elected prosecutors or their designee be included. And the reason is because, in addition to working very well with our friends, we know a lot about the operation of these courts. The budget issues are not uncommon to prosecutors' offices as well. The support issues, but the opportunity to participate as part of a committee would be one that I think would be well received by the council and by our elected prosecutors. We have been, PAC and the district attorneys and solicitors have been heavily engaged in the efforts to rewrite the code, in efforts to change sentencing, in efforts to provide more resources to the courts, and whenever we can be a resource to our friends, to our other stakeholders in the juvenile justice arena, we're happy to do so. And so, beyond that, I'll be happy to take any questions But if the committee is inclined to look at a committee-type appointment process, we would just respectfully request that the prosecutors be included in that.
Yeah. Previous folks have testified, like whenever I was, discussing or asking Judge Wood about that, that was something that has been included prior to, every circuit kind of does it a little bit differently. But some of them kind of, I know usually it was my sheriff and my DA and, those folks that got appointed. But it's more kind of habitual and not necessarily defined. Can you speak just a little bit to, prosecuting attorney's office's involvement in juvenile court and kind of how many days per week that they would spend, in a typical county and kind of how heavily involved they are in the juvenile courts?
That's kind of difficult because for me to do sitting in this chair today, because as the committee has seen in every circuit in every county, it's a little bit different, right? And so like with Judge Jones, with Sumter County carrying the bulk of their load, it would be difficult for me from the chair that I sit in to say. But with the participation of the prosecutors' offices in Chin's cases, and with the prosecutors regularly, I would say probably daily, being requested to provide extra assistance to the juvenile court on a given matter, the engagement of the prosecutors with the juvenile courts in our state is daily, extensive, and in general favorable.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Deputy Director Ashley? Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Turned off the wrong mic. Do any of the members of the committee, and I appreciate the members of Juvenile Justice being able to come as well, does anybody have any further questions or anything they would like to say before we adjourn? Okay, thank you so much. We are adjourned.